And apologize to everybody for the late start. We're getting on this meeting, but hey, we're here now. And just think how short the commute will be afterward. So I'd like to call the April 15th, 2020 board meeting to order and remind everybody to please mute your audio when you're not speaking. And please do also state your name prior to making a comment or a motion and a second for an action item. Thank you. I will ask that each commissioner please respond with a here when I call out his name. Commissioner Doan?
Here.
Commissioner Duggan?
Here.
Commissioner Sanders?
Here.
Commissioner Schmidt?
Here.
And I am Commissioner Bagnall, and I'm also here. So let's move to the first item, which is reports by the Chief Executive Officer and management staff. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you. So a couple items here. First item, we had Portland cryptosporidium results for the month of March 2020. Portland Water Bureau reported 5 cryptosporidium oocysts detected in select water samples collected from the Bull Run headworks. Additional details may be found at www.portlandoregon.gov/water/crypto results. The state has determined that the public does not need to take additional protections at this time. Portland Water Bureau will continue increased sampling 4 times per week until at least 3 weeks pass without any detections. The other one I want to talk about, as I have been, is more about our COVID-19 response. We continue to serve our customers through this event, but have also instituted some new tools to help us gauge how things are going. Later tonight, our CFO, Paul Matthews, will be providing a financial status update discussing some of those. At my request, he and his team put together a survey to share with other utilities so we could better see how utilities are responding to this event. The survey has been posted by the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies and to its members. The survey will help us better understand TVWD actions compared with the industry. The survey results will also assist in discussions with both the state and federal governments on the amount of assistance that may be needed. I'll just add a side note that I was on the WEA call this morning with Senator Wyden, and I asked the question about including some assistance for water and sewer customers in the next bill, similar to what the gas and power companies received. And his response was asking me for this very data that we have initiated collecting. So the good news is we're a little bit ahead of the curve, and we are working with our professional associations to try to get the data that our federal delegates are looking for. The other thing that I did is I asked the team to put together a dashboard of information so we can better see day to day what work is being done, the amount of work and types of calls we are getting. Sarah Alton has worked closely with other team members, and I would like to invite her now, if that's okay, to demonstrate the dashboard to the board, because I think this is something that will be useful not only in this event, but will be useful in the future, because I think we can make this available to future board members. So I'm going to turn this over for a few minutes here to Sarah Alton to run through the dashboard.
Well, thank you, Tom and commissioners, for giving me the opportunity to show you the dashboards that have been created by the Operations Center. And before we dive in, I just want to say that these dashboards are a team effort, and everybody has really stepped up at TVWD to provide these metrics that are being used on the dashboards. And I just want to thank Mike Jacobs for his leadership and hopefully delivering on the vision that Tom has for you guys. And just want to say that we're all very proud to work for TVWD, and we're grateful to the board and the leadership team for their support during this time. So with that, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and we can dive into these dashboards that have been created.
Can you put that up there?
Okay, I'm going to give you guys a second to make sure you're able to see this because I do know sometimes you've got to click on a different button.
This is Dick. I can see it fine.
And
Okay.
Bernice, I can see it fine.
This is Jim Doan. I've got it.
Okay.
Jim
Great.
Duggan
Sounds
looks
like
good.
Okay, wonderful. So this is a dashboard that's hosted here on our SharePoint site, the COVID-19 info site. And what we have right here at the very beginning is some quick links for you to be able to jump to whatever topic you're most interested in, as well as showing you where our workers are located. So for today, this is the metric of where all the workers were located, and the home location that's listed here is workers that are using any leave banks that they have, vacation, comp time, or sick time. And then the daily total will always equal the total number of staff. So the quick links, we've got customer service phone calls or responses, field customer service responses, system operations activity, and then to be added in a later version, we're hoping by the end of this week, we should have these 3 topics added: engineering capital improvement weekly report, engineering meter sales weekly report, and the Willamette water supply monthly status report. So moving right along, we've got customer service calls at the very beginning here. And these are all in the version 1 of these graphs. In a later version 2, we're hoping to add in some of the historical data that has been reported in the month in review. And so as we've collected more data moving forward, we will be able to show you how this compares to previous to the COVID-19 event. So right now, this is just data that has been entered by all of the leads and supervisors reporting on their teams. And we've been using a lot of the tools that are available to us in the Microsoft Online environment to capture this data. Customer phone calls, customer emails, number of unpaid delinquent accounts since March 16th, 2020. And this graph, so the day right now, April 15th, this is the current total number of accounts that are unpaid delinquent accounts. So this takes into effect anybody who's paid their bills. So tomorrow on 4/16, that number will be a different value. And then moving on to the types of phone calls that we've been receiving. The first one is can't pay due to a lost job or COVID-19. The next one is customers setting up payment arrangements due to COVID-19. Following that, we have payment arrangements created not related to COVID-19. We have customer balance requests where they've requested what their balance is on their account. Most common one I've seen is move in, move out. So it looks like we've been doing quite a lot of those. That's when a customer either starts or stops water service with us. Number of customers inquiring about equal pay, online account, auto pay, paymentus type inquiries, web credential inquiries, so a customer requesting their account number or online ID, mail or name change, leak adjustments, high bill questions, backflow questions, and then other inquiries, which is sort of a catch-all at this point. But as we've been capturing these call types, we're able to see what these other responses are. The customer service representatives have been doing a great job of entering in what those other inquiries are so that we're able to start distinguishing these and hopefully bring this other number down and pull these into a better category. And then the last one that we have under customer service would be if a work order was generated on behalf of a customer to have a field representative meet them on their property. The next section is field customer service activity, and I've added these links here to return to the top of the page. Say if you were done looking at customer service and you wanted to look at system operations next, you could just return to the top of the page to get there. So under field customer service activity, we have broken down the customer service responses of why our field staff would be going out. So we've got readouts, meter exceptions, and we've added some notes in here to help identify what some of these different things are. So an exception is when accounts are reviewed after the meter reading cycle and abnormal reads are flagged for a field response to confirm the reads and or check for stopped water meters. We have the customer calls, so this refers back to those work orders that were created by our customer service reps in the office. We have other, which includes things such as trims, going to pay stations, etc. And then other field customer service activities include the meters read for both our district and for the city of Beaverton, the number of meters installed for new water services, the number of water meters that have been repaired, the number of meters that have been inspected. And this one is under field customer service because it is related to water meters, but this is actually the work that's been done by our single workers out in the field. So this was the work that is being done to confirm that the meter is visible and accessible, not buried or obscured by vegetation, and that the meter is readable, that the curb stop is accessible and operable, that the meter box and lid are not broken, and that the meter identification number is correct in our utility billing program. If any follow-up maintenance work is needed, this is documented. These inspections are especially important for meters equipped with AMRs since they are not physically visited for reading during each billing cycle. And then related to this graph, we have a pie chart here showing the total number of water meters in our district. These are ones owned by TVWD that have a water meter on them. So this does not include any accounts that we are wheeling to other jurisdictions. So you can see we have, at this point, we've inspected 17% of the total water meters in the district just since we've started this operation back on March 23rd. And then moving on, we're in system operations activity. We've been tracking our water demand. You can see that we're starting to creep up upon the 20 million gallons per day mark there, which is indicative of the warm weather we've been having. The feet of water mains flushed, the number of fire hydrants that have been inspected. We've also been having a single worker go out and grab water quality samples that are being analyzed for chlorine residual and conductivity to determine water age and source blending characteristics. We're planning to add regulatory compliance samples at a later date, which would be the samples that are analyzed for chlorine residual, conductivity, pH, and are sent to a certified lab for bacteriological analysis. And with that, that is everything that I have. And if you wanted to, when you come back on here, you've got this button to return to the top of the page. And of course, these are all linked to Excel workbooks on the back end here. So it does take a few moments for everything to refresh and come to the current data set that is there. And it's been, like I said, a team effort, and we're all so proud of the work that we've been doing. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Sarah. And this is something that we believe once we get this dialed in better, it's something that we can share so that the board could access this if they were interested to see what's going on day to day and a way to track what's happening, especially right now. It's a much easier way for us to see are we actually being pretty productive with everyone separated. And as you can see, I think we are. I think we're responding to a lot. The other key indicators in there that we are definitely ahead of the curve on, based on the conversations we've had of starting to understand the nature of the calls that we're getting. So what's related to COVID and tracking the delinquency rates, because you can get people right now with us not shutting off water who don't pay but don't call either, because they know they're not going to get shut off. So that's why we also think it's important to watch that rate of increase, if there is, on the delinquent accounts. Those are early indicators, and later this evening you're going to hear Paul Matthews talk about that. With that, I'm going to go to the safety minute, and normally I would turn this over to Clark Balfour, and he is unfortunately not able to be with us tonight. So I will take the safety moment here. This is about face covering recommendations. There's been a lot of discussion around this and some debate, but where things are now is that the CDC recommends wearing cloth face coverings in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. Face coverings are not a replacement for staying home while sick, even with mild symptoms. Observing social distancing guidelines or good hand hygiene, it doesn't replace those. So it helps, but it doesn't fix those. Next slide. When you're putting on the face covering, we ask that you follow these steps. Before putting on a face covering, clean your hands with alcohol-based hand sanitizer or soap and water. Cover your mouth and nose with the mask and make sure there are no gaps between your face and the mask. Avoid touching the mask while using it. If you do, clean your hands with alcohol-based hand sanitizer or soap and water. And then replace the mask with a new one as soon as it is damp, and do not reuse it until it has been re-washed or dried. Next slide. When you're removing a face covering, do not touch the front of the mask. Instead, untie the mask from behind or by pulling on the elastic straps. Place the mask carefully in an enclosed receptacle such as a Ziploc bag. Clean hands with alcohol-based hand rub or soap and water. If you take the face covering off and on during the day, be sure to place the face covering in a paper bag or a plastic receptacle with the front of the mask face down so you can avoid touching that area when you put the covering back on. And I think, yeah, that's it. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to our chair.
All righty, we are going to skip the legal department report tonight. So turning to Commissioner communications and reports of meetings attended. Commissioner Doan, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I attending tonight meetings, of course. Last Friday as the Joint Water Commission, Barney Joint Operating Commission meeting, where we discussed things like reservoir capacity and fill rates. There was a work session on April 8th, and I had a conference call concerning partnership agreements. That's it.
Thank you. How about Commissioner Duggan next?
Had a pretty busy month. Sorry that I'm not turning on my video, but I have two other family members that are on various devices, and so I'll go through my report here real quick. On the 24th, I attended the Finance Committee meeting where we discussed the water supply system and Wi-Fi updates. On the 31st of March, I attended a meeting with Tom, Clark, Dick, Dave Kraska, and Commissioner Schmidt about the Hillsborough concerns and an update on that concerning the WWSS. On the 2nd of April, we had the regular WWSS meeting, which I'm sure Dave will cover when we next have a board work session. On the 7th, I attended the board workshop where we received WWSS and CIS updates, which we're going to hear about later in this meeting. On the 8th of April, I attended the Regional Water Providers Consortium Executive Committee meeting, which is our regular meeting. I have bad news for those folks that knew the representative for the Sunrise Water Authority to the consortium, Ernie Platt. He died last month from issues revolving pancreatic cancer. I just bring that up because Ernie Platt was a great person to work with. I knew him for over 30 years. First met him when he was the government liaison for the Home Builders Association, and got to work with him in many capacities. Most recently on the executive committee of the Regional Water Providers Consortium, but he was also active in SDAO. He'll be a real tough person to replace. He did so many things so well, and I was really disappointed to hear that he had passed away, because he was a great person to have around in building a consensus. And then at that meeting, we talked about COVID and concerns of the consortium, and how they plan on working on the initiatives of the consortium going forward. And then we have tonight's meetings. That's all I have to report for the last month. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Duggan, and I am very sorry to hear that Ernie Platt passed away. I had occasion to meet with him several times when we were doing outreach to the home builders about system development charges, and he was always a real pleasure to work with. That is sad news. Commissioner Sanders, can we have your report, please?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm not nearly as busy as anybody else. I attended our work session, and I am here at this evening's meeting.
Sounds good. Commissioner Schmidt, how about you?
Yes. Am I on?
You're on. We can hear you.
Okay. I also attended I have a pretty light month. I attended the work session and the JWC on Friday and tonight's meeting.
Thank you. And my report, which I turned in earlier and I forgot a meeting from it. I don't know how I could, but I did. On the 24th of March, I attended the Finance Committee meeting to have a discussion about the WIFIA. And on the 30th, I met with Commissioner Sanders, with our legal counsel, with our Willamette Water Supply Manager, the CEO, the CFO, and the Chief Engineer. I mean, it was a room full of luminaries to discuss the Hillsborough cost allocations. On the 7th of April, I attended the board work session where we again discussed the Willamette Water Supply System and the Customer Information System and WIFIA. On the 10th, I attended the JWC meeting where I'm sure everybody will be thrilled to learn we approved the budgets for both Barney and the Joint Water Commission for 2021. On the 14th, I had a meeting with the CEO to do agenda planning, and then tonight's meeting on the 15th. And as I said, I had originally turned in my form, but I forgot the JWC meeting on the 10th. It's the longest one I attended. I don't know how I could have forgotten. Do we have any topics to be raised by commissioners?
None here.
All right, hearing nothing else, then we move to the public comment. Public comment time is set aside for persons wishing to address the board on items on the consent agenda and matters not on the regular agenda. Additional public comment will be invited on agenda items as they're presented. Now, my understanding is that we do have one member of the public, David Schmidt, on the phone, but that he stated in advance he was not going to have comments. So that being the case, I'll move to the next item, which is the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are considered to be routine and may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Any board member may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action, and any items requested to be removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion will be considered immediately after the board has approved those items which do not require discussion. We've just got 2 items on tonight's consent agenda. The first is to approve the March 18th, 2020 regular meeting minutes, and the second is to approve the district's Families First coronavirus response. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda, or does anyone need anything removed?
This is Dick. I so move.
This is Jim Duggan. I second.
Catherine, will you please provide a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bagnall,
Yes.
Commissioner Doan,
Yes,
Commissioner Duggan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanders,
Yes.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Yes.
Thank you. That being unanimous, the motion passes. Now we move on to the business agenda, and the only item on the business agenda is to consider adopting Resolution 09-20, a resolution approving the intergovernmental agreement between Tualatin Valley Water District and Clean Water Services for customer information system project activities. And we'll have a staff report from Customer Service Manager Andrew Carlstrom. Take it away, Andrew.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, President Bagnall and Board of Commissioners. And tonight's presentation will be very brief, and because we went over this in the work session last week, again, this is the CIS implementation IGA with Clean Water Services. So as a reminder, we have 3 phases and 3 agreements for the CIS project. Phase 1 takes us from initiation through contract negotiation, and both boards authorized that in June of 2018. The item you have before you for consideration tonight is the Phase 2 IGA for implementation, and that takes us through stabilization, go live and stabilization of the CIS solution. The IGA provides a framework for sharing external costs as well as labor costs of both agencies, and both agencies' boards are considering this IGA this month. Clean Water Services Board will be considering it next week. And then the Phase 3 IGA will be our ongoing operations agreement with Clean Water Services, and we'll develop that and request authorization before we go live with the new CIS. And we expect at this time that will be sometime in the summer or fall of 2021, depending on whether we have a 14 or a 16-month implementation. So at a glance, the Phase 3 IGA, the implementation agreement, again, this is cost sharing for direct project expenses, things like vendor products and services, third-party consultant services, facility costs, labor, these are staff allocated to the project, and other project costs that are mutually agreed upon by both agencies. The methodology, the board will delegate to the CEO working with Clean Water Services and his delegates, development of a task-based structure for sharing direct project costs, because some projects will benefit both partners, they will be shared, and some costs will benefit only one partner, and these will not be shared. And again, we'll be developing, if you authorize this agreement and Clean Water Services Board authorizes the agreement, that task-based structure. And finally, expense reporting. Both partners will be reporting expenses during the duration of the implementation, and we'll also have regular true-ups of the costs during the implementation. So that's the agreement at a glance. And before I turn it over for any questions you may have, I just wanted to mention that Paul Matthews will be giving a presentation tonight, and he'll be touching briefly on, in his presentation, on one of the struggles that we've had with the legacy system, and that is tracking receivables. So anyways, that's the agreement, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very clear. So do we have questions or discussion from any of the commissioners? All righty then, do I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 09-20, a resolution approving the intergovernmental agreement between Tualatin Valley Water District and Clean Water Services for customer information system project activities?
This is Jim Doan, so moved.
Todd Sanders, and I second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Catherine, will you provide a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bagnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Doan,
Yes.
Commissioner Duggan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanders,
Yes.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Yes.
Thank you. That was unanimous, so the motion passes. Next, we have an informational presentation. It is an update on the impact of COVID-19 crisis on the district's financial performance, and the staff report will be given by our CFO, Paul Matthews.
Good evening, President Bagnell and Commissioners. You might remember last week during the work session, I apologized for the presentation I gave in terms of the content being dry and thick. Well, that's by comparison tonight, that was going to be the exciting one of the month. This one has got a lot of details in it, and I apologize in advance. Also, I want to apologize specifically, we weren't able to modify the colors in some of the graphics here to match our template, which is important for some of our commissioners to make everything visible. And we had to take the colors that came from the program itself, and we'll work on trying to make sure those colors are consistent with the approved palette. But right now, we just want to get this information out to you tonight. And so apologize in advance for that.
Oh, this is Jim Doan. It worked fine. Don't worry about it.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Doan. It's important that our information be accessible to everybody, and I was very concerned about that since we didn't have that flexibility, but I appreciate your comment on that. Tonight, I'm going to break the presentation up into two parts. One, just talking in general about our economic concerns as we deal with the COVID-19 crisis. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the TVWD specific issues that we have to talk about. So I'll just run through the presentation here, hitting those high points. First of all, the national output. What I have here is for those of us that like to look at open, high, low, close charts for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that's what that looks like. But for those of us that like to see numbers that make sense, here's what we've seen in the news that's going on with the Dow, which is a lagging indicator of oftentimes of economic, or leading indicator of economic activity. As we can see, though, after the COVID-19 sort of hit the reality here in the United States, and we started to use shelter in place and take other mitigation measures, the stock market declined considerably, and that's in recognition of the economic times that are coming at us in the short while. As you shut down the economy abruptly like we did, we can expect to have some effects. Notwithstanding that, Congress and the administration have put some stimulative effects into the economy with recent legislation, but nevertheless, we are anticipating that it may take some time before the economy recovers, and that will affect TVWD's customers in many ways. Looking here, what we presented is first-time unemployment claims in the Portland metropolitan area over the past 3 weeks, ending April 4th. So we don't have the numbers yet for the most recent release, which was on the 11th. But in any event, here you can see that initially we've lost almost 19,000 jobs just in the accommodations and food services. That's hotels and restaurants. And you can see what's happened during that 3-week period to other parts of our workforce here in the Portland metropolitan area. So, as expected, major reductions in employment have occurred, especially in that hard-hit accommodations and restaurant sector. If we break it down, though, and we look at it on an individual weekly basis, you can see that the first week there, the week ending 3/21, saw the large hit to the accommodation and food services. And you see that the subsequent weeks were still very large hits in absolute numbers, but relatively less for them. And other parts of the labor force have picked up their fair share of this as well. But here's what's happened. We look at comparing Washington County, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County. A lot of those job losses were in Multnomah County, many in Washington County, a little bit less in Clackamas County. But we need to look at those in terms of the population. So here it is in tabular form. If we look at the first-time claims, so this is the first time that somebody came in and filed a claim with the State Employment Division saying that they lost their job. So the week of the 15th, you can see that in Washington County we had 7,357 claims. The week of the 4th, 6,578 claims. So over that period of time, total about 14,000 claims. But when we look at the population of the counties and look at it on a per population basis, you can actually see that Washington County did better than either Multnomah County or Clackamas County. Now, this is a comparison of population, not workers, and so the labor force participation rate actually is an important component of this, and it can vary depending on household size and some of those other factors. But in general, what we see here is that Washington County is in relatively better shape. But I must emphasize that there's just too little information here for us to make definitive statements. Having said that, Washington County appears to be in better shape than the rest of the metropolitan area. So what's going on nationally? And I'm not going to go through these details, but sitting on some of the information that I monitor, one of them is Wells Fargo Securities. They had a webcast with the three major rating agencies. And for the utility sector, they aren't making any changes. You don't want to be in the convention center business right now. Your credit would be under much more scrutiny. But right now, they're looking at the industry, and their econometric models indicate that that there's no need to downgrade credit at this point, but for sure they will be watching the sector as it goes forward. So for TVWD, the outlook here, the industry perspective, yes, we are an essential service utility, meaning that provides us a strong credit. Hence what I just said about the rating agencies not downgrading utilities like ours. But there's another perspective here, which is our customers, and the ability of our customers to pay their bill is going to depend on their individual circumstances. And so we have a lot of customers, and their ability to pay the bill will vary. Washington County may be in better shape, as I showed earlier, than other areas, and certainly other parts of the country were in better shape. Our current policy of abating turnoffs may complicate customers' abilities to pay their bills when in the future. So a couple months go by, and what was $100 to TVWD becomes $200, $300, $400. It becomes harder for these customers to work themselves back to a current status. So that's something that we want to keep track of as well. In terms of our future revenue, economic activity will affect our future revenues as well as our collections. And we're watching our water sales, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. And of course, you just saw what Sarah presented earlier on that matter. But general consensus is that the longer this COVID-19 affects the economy, the longer that we're in this time of shutdown and shelter in place, the tougher it'll be to rebound. So the scar tissue will build more over time, I guess, and it'll take us longer to work out of that the longer this goes on. Now, Tom mentioned the survey that we did, and this is a survey that TVWD did. We knew we wanted to have a better sense of what's going on nationally with our customer assistance program. So we did prepare a survey, sent it out to recipients, contacts that I have throughout the nation that Tom has. And you can see here we've so far gotten 39 responses from the large agencies. LADWP responded, as well as small agencies. We did some small agencies here in Oregon just to see what was going on. The goal of this survey was to find out, trying to stay ahead of the curve here. We know we're going to come under pressure to look at our customer assistance program. We didn't want to wait until that pressure was right on us before we looked at some of the opportunities we might have to modify the program. So I'm going to step through some of the initial findings that we have from the survey. And first of all, one of the first questions we asked was whether or not the utilities have implemented or modified their customer assistance program as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. And so far, 17 have said they have, 2 said no, but they're currently planning on doing that, 2 said no, but they are, or 7 said no, but they are considering that. So that's kind of an important metric out of that. A lot of people are now looking at these things and trying to make some adjustments to the program as they go forward. By the way, I just want to define customer assistance program in the event that that isn't something that we've used with you before, but that's a program where we help customers pay their water bills, and there are a variety of ways of doing that. Customer assistance program is that bigger description of the suite of possibilities that are there. Speaking of that, here are some of the possibilities that people have for customer assistance. One would be to have a low-income rate. Very few people actually have that. A low-income discount. A low-income discount is where you apply a discount to a bill, but you set the rates that are prevalent for that customer class. Lifeline rates. The crisis assistance program, that is what we call our customer emergency assistance program. Quite a few, 13 responded that that's how they are, that's the customer assistance program that they offer. The one that was interesting to me was the arrearage forgiveness, only 3. And the interesting thing there is that it's going to take us a while before we build up a group of customers really that have arrearages that they're going to ask forgiveness. So although that doesn't seem to be a popular one now, I think we want to watch that to see how that evolves, because as pressure comes on water utilities, we may see that become more popular. Penalty forgiveness, popular, and the most popular are the payment plans, which is when a customer has a difficult time paying their bill, they call in to make arrangements to pay those bills. One of the other questions that I was curious about is, how are people funding this? Are they assessing it to all customer classes, or are they recovering it just from the residential customer classes? And overwhelmingly, all customer classes. And in fact, many of the others that you see there are things that say all customer classes except for wholesale customers, which would make sense. And nobody assesses on their wholesale customers. So we may want to remind the City of Portland of that if that becomes an issue. And the other curious question, then I'll get off this topic of the survey, is billing frequency. One of the challenges we have is that we bill bi-monthly, and as Andrew Carlstrom mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons we want to continue our investment in the CIS project, is so we can get to monthly billing. Most utilities do monthly. Out of the quarterly, I must say that actually we had 2 responses from the City of Portland who are quarterly, so in a sense we probably have overstated that by one count. I'm going to turn gears now on. You quit talking about the national. I want to talk about TVWD's financial performance and the concerns that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, there are really 3 areas. Revenues, which are the impact on our future water sales. Collection, which is once we sell the water, the capacity for our customers to actually pay their water bills. And then the third one is expenses and the effect on the district's budget from the COVID-19. So we'll step through those real quickly. First of all, the forecasting of revenues is actually difficult, and this is not specific to TVWD. This is just in general. Some of the challenges we have here, though, as I mentioned, the bi-monthly billing structure, our block rates, which makes revenue weighting very difficult to do. The weather. So we're starting to see water sales increase, and we may think, well, that's a good thing, but are they increasing enough given that the weather is driving those? That's a question that we have. The Beaverton withdrawals have thrown us somewhat of a curveball. We've had to take that into account. And then the thing we're really trying to understand is, what is the COVID-19 part of this? So we have a lot of moving parts going on. Trying to isolate that to what's going on with COVID-19 will be very difficult. But given the billing structures and everything else, we want to look at water deliveries as a good indicator of water sales. So our general approach is to use the daily deliveries, and you saw some of those in Sarah's presentation, and develop trend data. We'll account for the Beaverton withdrawals, and we'll match the seasonality of demands by looking over time. So in a sense, these are just placeholder numbers because we're still developing the data sources behind this. But this will be based on our water deliveries adjusted for changes in reservoir levels, and that's something that we can monitor on a more frequent basis than waiting for the 2-month meter reading cycle to pass through. Turning now to collections, the challenge we have there is that collections is a lagging indicator of customer financial health. You know, people, it's going to be a while. They'll experience an economic hardship before they get their bill and are unable to pay their bill. So it's a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator. And of course, we want leading indicators to the extent we can to stay ahead of this. Our UB system does not report our account receivables, collection, and write-offs in an industry standard manner. And what I mean there is we have some challenges just in the UB system in reconciling our account receivable aging report. We're making some ad hoc data requests, and our IT folks are helping us get that data and new reporting mechanisms so we can come up with proxies for these things. But it's just the way that the UB system's architected doesn't provide that naturally. As I mentioned before, our current policy on shutoffs will affect customer behaviors. There could be some customers, given that we won't turn off their water when faced with paying their car loan or their rent payment or maybe even their cable bill, will decide to do those things before they pay their water bill because they know that they won't have a shutoff from that perspective. And our current policy may complicate making customers current in the future. Again, it's that accumulation of the arrearages that may make it more difficult for customers to become current. Now, one of the things that, and this is where I'm going to get into the weeds and apologize up front, this is a dense subject matter that's not a very fun thing to talk about, but this may affect the district's accounting for its allowance for doubtful accounts. And so under our generally accepted accounting principles, we make an allowance for our account receivables that we assume we may not be able to collect on. And we do that throughout the year. But given this crisis, we may need to make an adjustment. To put it in perspective, recently I was reading an article that JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, they have a similar accounting requirement. It's a provision for their loans that they make. They are obviously banks. They're in a different business than we are. And I think it was JP Morgan that had like a reserve of $800 million or something like that. They increased it to $6.8 billion. I think it was Wells Fargo that had something in the several hundreds of millions, and they increased it to over $3 billion. So these banks have econometric models that they run. They're required to do that as part of their, post Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. They have these models that say, water utilities don't do this. This isn't what we do for a living. But we know that these things are coming, and that's what we're trying to get ahead of. If we have to make an adjustment to our allowance for doubtful accounts, it will affect our bad debt expense, which is a budget item, and we may be coming back for a supplemental budget. We'll talk more about that in a bit. I want to talk about our monitoring on the collections issues and our approach to doing that. First, we're going to look at some traditional tactics, metrics that people use. The account receivable aging report is a very standard way of doing that. As I mentioned, the problem there is that it's a lagging indicator, and currently we get that only on a monthly basis, so it's an untimely lagging indicator. But with the help of our IT resources, we've been able to get that reported on a more frequent basis, and so that will give us a time step that is more meaningful. However, we do need to aggregate these because our business processes and how we read meters, issue bills, and send them out, it doesn't happen at a constant rate throughout the week or the month, and we have billing cycles that are of different sizes and different parts of our customer base. So we're going to have to group those things with some sort of moving average in order to get some validity. It's to get the signal to noise ratio up. The challenge is in doing that grouping with moving averages, you get a better signal, but you end up with a little bit more latency, and that the cost of doing that is the timeliness of the reports. So we're going to be looking at how do we get these metrics nailed in so that it provides meaningful information but is as timely as possible. And just the underlying phenomena needs to be taken into account as we try to fine tune that. So looking at the account receivable aging report, just to give you an idea of what that is, and these are just for illustrative purposes, because as I said, our IT guys are working on this reporting mechanism right now. It basically tells us how many people are current, how much of our account receivable is current, 30 days overdue, 60 days plus, 90 days, 120 days, and that's a very typical way that a business looks at its account receivables to see what collection issues they have. The other approach that we're implementing, which is not common for utilities, but is common outside of the utility business, or outside the municipal utility business, I should say, is to look at day sales outstanding. And it measures the number of days on average it takes to collect on a sale. For us, all of our UB sales, all of our customer bills are in the arrears, more or less. We provide the water, we read the meter, and then we send a bill, meaning that they're in a credit position with us just by the nature of the way we do our business. So we'll take our total account receivables divided by our total sales times 365 days. And that metric tells us how many days on average, that's an annual sales figure, how many days on average we are outstanding at any one time. If we see an increase in the days sales outstanding, that will be an indicator of collection challenges. We propose to use an annual basis, moving average of 12 months for the denominator to keep that, again, to keep the signal to noise ratio in a reasonable area. And we'll have to determine what the appropriate time step is for reporting. Right now, my gut tells me that it's a 2-week time step at minimum. We'll see if it can be a weekly time step, but it may have to be monthly or even bi-monthly. We'll see when we are able to measure that data. Now, the other thing I want to talk a little bit about is how our write-off process works and what do we mean by a bad debt expense and allowance for doubtful accounts. So when we write off an account, there's a specific set of steps we go through, but it all starts with that generally accepted accounting principle that when we issue a bill and we recognize revenue, we don't recognize all the revenue. So here at TVWD right now, for every $100 that we bill, we assume that 20 cents will not be collected, and that's based on past performance, obviously before COVID-19. That's a really low number, and most businesses would really love to have 20 cents out of $100 as a write-off rate. But again, given that we're in the utility business and we have the ability to shut off water, that's how we enforce those payments. We're in a situation where we're not using shut-off, so we can expect that 20 cents will become more of a problem. So how do we fund that 20 cents? We budget something called bad debt expense. Now, that's an operating expense. We've budgeted $161,430 in the current biennium. It's in my department budget, so it's a very important thing we monitor that closely because I don't want my department to be over budget. But in any event, that bad debt expense, we use that to fund the allowance for doubtful accounts. And that's, again, following generally accepted accounting principles. You recognize that as an expense in the period to match your account receivable. So the bad debt expense is expensed as revenue is recognized, and it's held in this allowance for doubtful accounts account, which, if anybody's interested, it's a contra asset account. It offsets the account receivable. The actual write-offs are then charged against the allowance for doubtful accounts, so it brings that balance down as we experience write-offs. So we put money in there expecting we may have write-offs, and then we experience the actual write-offs, and that reduces the balance for those accounts. If a write-off is collected, then we put the money back into the allowance account. If the total write-offs exceed the balance in the account, then we have to experience an additional bad debt expense in order to bring it back up, because we can't have this account go negative. So as we get close to the end of the biennium, or the fiscal year, we'll be looking at that account and making sure that we have adequate allowance for doubtful accounts. If we don't, we will then have to have more bad debt expense to bring that account balance up. That's an appropriated material and services, so it may require us to come back to the board for a supplemental budget. Now, I want to just bring one item to your attention here, which is that we have this Customer Emergency Assistance Fund, and we fund that. I'll talk more about that. We fund that in part with appropriations from the district. It's a separate fund. That is used to help customers pay their water bill. So if a customer has help paying their water bill, and that water bill is paid through, in part with Customer Emergency Assistance Fund, that reduces our write-offs. More or less, we're collecting not necessarily directly from the customer, but from the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund. Regardless, we don't have to write off the receivable. We actually are getting paid. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I'm going to shift gears and now talk about the expenses and the effect that might have on the budget for COVID-19. There are different kinds of expenses that we have. We have some direct expenses of setting up the incident command system, the emergency operating center. Those expenses, as well as we have some new leave requirements that federal law has put on us. Both of those two things, frankly, don't directly affect our budget because we have already budgeted the personnel services to pay for those expenses. What it's doing is it's taking the effort that people would normally be doing on one activity and diverting it to another activity, or in the case of a leave, it's allowing people to take leave consistent with the requirements of federal law. So it doesn't have a direct effect on the budget unless we experience overtime cost as a result of that. So far, we really haven't seen that. We have some intangible expenses, and I call them intangible expenses. So we talked last week about our debt service coverage ratio and how we calculate that. One of the important things is that as we have our crews working on things like the meter boxes and fire hydrants, those are expense projects, and they're not working on capital projects. And so that can affect what is considered an operating expense versus a capital outlay. And that's what I describe here as an intangible. And then the bad debt expense and the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund that I talked about, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail on those. So again, the bad debt expense, it's incurred to offset future charges to the allowance for doubtful accounts as revenues is recognized. That's a GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle. It's how we keep our books, and it's a requirement. The amount that's expensed is estimated to match the burden of our current sales to maintain a balance in our allowance for doubtful accounts. So ideally, as we experience the revenue, we say, well, that's going into our account receivables. We may not receive all that account receivable. 20 cents on the $100 goes into that account. That 20 cents on the $100 is the $64,000 question. Is that the right number now? My concern is that things have fundamentally changed, and that the assumption that has been accurate over the past 10 years, 5 years, may not be the one that we ought to be using today. So is our current bad debt expense ratio represent future collections? I'm concerned it may not be. Is the bad debt expense that is appropriate as an M&S item in the TVWD budget, is that an appropriate amount? That's something that we'll be watching very carefully, and if necessary, be talking to the board about the bad debt expense. I want to talk just a bit about our Customer Emergency Assistance Fund, because that's an important fund in how we might deal with both the bad debt expense, the allowance for doubtful account, as well as taking care of our customers. So first of all, back in about 2014 or 2015, I don't remember exactly, we transitioned to bringing the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund in-house. Prior to that, customer donations went to a third-party organization called Care to Share that administered our program for us. They held the money, and they did the accounting behind that. We became concerned about the viability of that option, so we brought this in-house. And we created a separate fund within TVWD that holds the donations from our customers, employees, and commissioners. So the sources of money for the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund are donations from our customers that they make when they pay their utility bill, from employees, from commissioners, and from appropriated funds within TVWD. So TVWD in its budget appropriates funds that are transferred to the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund. We have paid the cost of the third-party evaluator of customer eligibility. We paid that with TVWD money so that the donations have been used solely for the benefit of customers. Any interest that's earned in that fund stays in the fund and is available then to help our customers. So if a customer makes a donation to the fund, that money will be used for their neighbors to help pay their water bill, and the interest earned on that money will be available to those customers to help pay their water bill. We can extend it by seeking additional donations and participation by Clean Water Services. So right now, Clean Water Services participates because part of the donations are recognized as being for the total bill, water, sanitary, sewer, and storm, and they do have some employee donations that come through. So we can expand it by getting additional donations from others, encouraging customers to donate, as well as participation by Clean Water Services. With the board authorization, and we need to do board authorization, the district can transfer additional resources from any savings that we might have in the general fund to fund customer assistance. And the way that would take place is we would ask the board to reclassify those savings from either personnel services or materials services into a transfer. That's a different kind of appropriations category that would then be used to transfer to the Fund 43, our Customer Emergency Assistance Fund. We would also likely ask the board to appropriate within Fund 43 the ability to use those funds to assist customers. The eligibility criteria that we have for customers may be changed by board direction. Currently, we allow customers to access the fund once per year. There are other eligibility criteria that could be changed in light of the COVID-19 situation. One other point, the last one I want to make here, which I alluded to earlier, is that funds paid to TVWD from the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund might reduce the pressure on our bad debt expense. So we will, if customers can't pay the bill, we'll need to increase our bad debt expense. Alternatively, if we help customers pay the bill, the money that we might otherwise be putting in that bad debt expense could be used to help customers reduce their bill. So here's the process that we use with the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund. First, it starts with a customer contacting TVWD's Customer Service Department asking for assistance. We then have a third party that assesses the customer's eligibility following our eligibility guidelines. Once eligibility is established, a voucher is created by TVWD to transfer the funds from the Customer Emergency Assistance to pay the utility bill. A lot of steps to go through that process to make sure that our accounting system and our utility billing system pick that up so that the customer bill is shown as being paid. Current maximum funding, depending on availability of resources, we can pay both. We can assist both with TVWD as well as Clean Water Services bills. $65 for TVWD water bills, $35 for the sanitary sewer and surface water management bill. However, because Clean Water Services hasn't appropriated money and it's only funded by the customer donations, their money runs dry generally and is dry at this moment. So essentially our customers would only be eligible for the TVWD portion, $65. It requires the customer to come current on their bill by paying the outstanding balance. So in a sense, Clean Water Services benefits immediately from that because what isn't paid by the $65 becomes current on their sewer bill. So for those TVWD joint customers, in a sense, CWS benefits from that. I plan to have a conversation with their CFO and encourage them to participate in this because they too are going to be faced with an allowance for doubtful accounts as well as a bad debt expense. This is not unique to TVWD. This is how generally accepted accounting principles work. And so we can have that conversation with them. I'm hoping that we can encourage their participation more fully in the customer emergency assistance program. I'm going to wrap up here. Our next steps, changing topics from the customer emergency assistance program to the overall presentation. Our next steps is we're going to continue to create the reporting mechanisms for revenues, account receivable aging, and our days of sales outstanding. We're going to calibrate the time steps for those reports to increase this, what I describe as the signal to noise ratio. I'm not an engineer, but I like to sound like one. In this case, I guess I'm trying to sound like an electrical engineer, maybe. We'll monitor our expenditures and our collections closely. We'll pursue opportunities to leverage our existing customer emergency assistance fund. We'll brief the board regularly on the situation, and where necessary, ask or recommend actions that you may take. And the last item is we're going to maintain our flexibility to address what is really an uncertain future. We want to keep as much flexibility in the system as we can. If we're going to have to make changes, our preference would be to make the changes earlier while we have more options rather than wait the last minute where there aren't as many options. And finally with that, I'd like to answer any questions and hear the comments that you might have on the efforts that we have here.
Well, you've done a lot of thinking about this, and I was particularly fascinated to hear how much banks are putting into essentially bad debt. And it sounds like also from what you've just been going through that depending on how your conversations with Clean Water Services go and depending how the numbers play out, we might not only see a supplemental budget request to increase our bad debt number, but we might also possibly see a request to increase funding for the customer emergency assistance program. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, I think you're more likely to see the second one before the first one. The reason why I say that is because we have a biennial budget, we probably have enough capacity in the bad debt expense to get us through June 30. I don't want to make any promises because this is nothing but uncertainty, but it seems that we'll have enough resources to get through June 30. I'm worried that that masks maybe an underlying problem that we have. So it's quite possible we get through June 30 with our current bad debt expense in the budget being sufficient. But I don't want to wait until too long before we look at providing more assistance in the Customer Emergency Assistance Fund so that A, we can get ahead of the bad debt by helping customers pay their bills. And if we're going to experience an expense, regardless, either a bad debt expense or Customer Emergency Assistance Fund expense in helping our customers, my preference would be to do that so that we don't suffer reputational harm needlessly. It's important for customers to pay their bill, but it's also a necessity that they're able to pay their bill. And if they can't pay their bill, they won't pay their bill. And we'll have the bad debt expense. So if we can somehow manage to help them with donations from other customers, as well as maybe savings that we can find in the district, and that's the direction that Tom has given us, is to look real hard for those savings. And so maybe I should just let Tom speak to that.
Yeah, so that's right now kind of the first tier here of finding ways to help our customers is to, I've instructed staff to review their budgets, look for where we can have some savings that we could reallocate for this fund for customer assistance. We will be monitoring, and as the need grows and the communications we have with the board, we will either look to add to that fund or change what we're doing entirely, because there will be some point if that got severe enough, we can't help everybody indefinitely. What we were hoping is we could find something that's going to help everybody through maybe the next few months and get them over the hill. But if this is something that draws out for a very long time, we're going to have to be taking very different approaches and very different types of cuts.
And in addition to looking at this, we're also pursuing, as I think Tom mentioned, the conversation that he had with Senator Merkley's staff. Just got an email from Professor Teodoro, which I know President Bagnall knows him. He had written an article with the suggestion on how the federal government can help water customers by essentially providing some resources to utilities to fund these kinds of activities. And just got an email today that it looks like they're trying to pursue that at the federal level. So we read a blog post from Mandy and we forwarded it on to our people here. And I think Norm Eater and others and Tom brought it to our delegation. And now that's the discussion back in Washington, D.C. So that's pretty exciting. Went from Texas to Portland to Washington, D.C.
Good on you. I like it. Do other board members have questions for Paul?
Yeah, Paul, this is Todd Sanders. For my first question is, what is the timeline between when someone applies for assistance and when information is given to them as to their eligibility? You said it goes through a third party, so I just wondered what that timeline was.
That I don't know, because I don't get involved in the actual process of that. So I want to see if maybe Andrew or if Andrew knows or if Andrea. We'll find out regardless, Commissioner Sanders. I don't think it has to be a very long period of time. However, we are concerned about the current agency that is doing that and their ability to scale up. They've had some operational difficulties, and so we're looking at, so this was an organization that used to do it for both TVWD and the City of Beaverton. I understand now the City of Beaverton is using another organization, Community Action Network, which also administers the LIHEAP program, the Low Income Energy Assistance Program, Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. That's where the H comes from. But let me see if either Andrea or Andrew could answer your question now, or otherwise we'll get back to you on that.
Paul, this is Andrew. I don't have that information, but I can get it for us to report back to the board.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. And then following up with that question, what type of documentation are they given, say they're declined? So if that could be added into the request to Andrew. And then finally, you had said earlier in the discussion that we could maybe allocate funds from a savings or from savings in other divisions. I'm not using, boy, you can tell I'm not an economist. Do we have any savings in any of our other budget areas as of right now?
Yes. So we do have savings, and in fact, based on the direction from Tom, we're generating more savings. So just kind of a couple things that come to mind. We are essentially in a de facto hiring freeze. So we have some vacancies that are generating savings. Other savings that we've experienced, we got a very favorable renewal on our healthcare insurance policy. Unexpected, but that came forward. We also, you might remember that we funded a per site account. We got a matching, we got some matching dollars out of the state's employer incentive fund, about $680,000. So that's some savings as well. So we have some savings that we're tracking, and we can generate more savings in future over our budget amount. That's what Tom has asked us to do, is go through our budgets and look for those kinds of savings. One of the other savings, frankly, is that our training activities have been significantly impacted. Simply, we don't want people on airplanes. It's hard to do social distancing at 35,000 feet. So that's resulted in some forced savings there as well. So there are savings, and we do have resources that we could devote either to the bad debt expense or to funding the customer emergency assistance program if need be. I don't think we need to reach into the contingency at this point for that.
Hi, this is Jim Duggan. Paul, I want to thank you for putting together a very thoughtful piece, and I'm sure we're going to have to deal more with this issue as we go into the future. I'm especially interested in how your discussions with Clean Water Services goes, because I thought it was kind of instructive to see that the maximum benefit given, $65 for water and $35 for sewer, is a reversal of the typical bill where it's usually that the water bill is less than the surface water and sanitary portion of the combined bill. And in the past, I've had a lot of discussions with Clean Water Services in Washington County about our emergency assistance program. And again, this is going back years. I will be very interested to hear if they've changed their attitude toward how our emergency assistance program has worked, and the fact that it benefits them tremendously. So thank you, Paul.
Yes, and Commissioner Duggan, on that front, I think that Clean Water Services has become aware of this challenge. I don't think it's necessarily the utility as much as maybe there have been some changes within their elected officials. And so actually attended a meeting that they were hosting with the member cities to look at how they're looking at this, of course, from the sewer and the SWIM surface water management perspective, and they're looking, of course, how it works at the large cities. And I think they've kind of overlooked the fact that this program exists and that they can access it actually quite readily. There's no reason why we need to limit this just to TVWD. This, again, where the donations come from and how they serve our customers and our neighbors. Clean Water Services is a participant in this program, and I don't think they recognize really at this point, other than some of the staff, that it is serving their customers. And their customers are our neighbors, and sometimes I'm a customer of TVWD and Clean Water Services, so I'm both. And we have, I think, an opening with them now to get them to participate in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I've had some conversations, and Diane is very interested to hear what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I will be sharing as we develop our program here what we're doing, and I'm going to be asking that they do something similar, because it otherwise it just is going to look just frankly bad and
be very complicated.
Be messy. And I mean, the other challenge is, if we're doing these kinds of things and they don't, and we're the smaller part of the bill, and yet we're collecting those payments for them, customers still call us as the problem, and I see that as a problem for us.
Yeah, that is a problem of long standing. Are there other questions? Well,
and we will get, President Bagnall, we will also be producing a report on our survey results. We're going to share that with all the people that participate in the survey, but we'll also share that with the board as well.
Excellent. Well, it seems to me that we have reached the end of our stuff.